Hey Nine, welcome to lesson 13, I do believe. That could be wrong. I hope it is lesson 13. So we're going to talk today about stem cell dilemmas. If you can't hear me, well, it's irrelevant if you can't hear me. Turn the sound up and welcome along. So we're going to look at stem cell dilemmas today. You should have looked at the two types of stem cells, so adult tissue stem cells and embryonic stem cells. And you might have looked at also plant stem cells from meristems. You might want to print or save the slides 20 to 27 to help you with today's lesson. So let's get cracking. First thing you can do is probably want to pause here and just think if you can define 3 key words from last lesson or 3 key points, because repetition is really the key to learning things and putting them into your long-term memory. Or you might want to just summarize it into a paragraph until it's a really, really good piece of knowledge that you've got. Repetition is key when we're learning. What we're learning today is the benefits, risks, social and ethical issues with using stem cells. So for a grade 2 to 4, you'd be looking at arguments for and against use of stem cells. These are kind of the basic ideas of why it's good and bad. You might be able to have a discussion with someone about it. For a grade 5 to 6, we're going to look at therapeutic cloning and what it can be used for with some really good examples. If you can give really good examples, very specific objections, and you can verbally communicate with someone, and that's brilliant. It might be worth actually having a discussion about this when we finished with somebody, because you can really test your understanding if you can talk to someone about it. If you can explain what goes on in therapeutic cloning and evaluate it clearly, then you're going to be moving on to a grade 7 or 8, particularly if you can be persuasive. So let's just have a think about this. So patients with type 1 diabetes have to inject themselves every day for the whole of their lives. There could be a new treatment using stem cells grown from embryos. Would you advise the patient to use the treatment? What information would you need to be able to make the decision? So you might want to just have a think about that. So remembering that diabetes is a condition where sufferers can inject 4 or 5 times a day insulin, but they could get stem cells from embryos. So what could be the issue there? Clue is where embryos come from, I think, could be an issue. Let's talk about stem cell therapy. There's lots of different benefits, but because stem cells are undifferentiated, and that is a key word, they can be used in theory to treat a lot of conditions in humans. Technology is new, it's quite risky. There's quite a few ethical dilemmas that we can look into. Maybe have a think about what some of the social and ethical issues might be with using embryonic stem cells in medicine. Now, if you aren't sure or can't remember what an embryo is, so an embryo is an undifferentiated cell that is formed weeks after fertilization. So when a sperm and an egg's nuclei fuse to make a zygote, that zygote will divide via mitosis and create an embryo. And those embryos are able to differentiate or specialize into any type of cell. Now, if you use those embryonic stem cells, they then can take on the form of any other cell in the body. So, for example, they did an experiment where they had the structure of a heart and then injected it with stem cells. And then that heart started beating within a few days because those cells knew that they were structurally meant to be heart cells. So they adapted, differentiated, etc. The next slide has some ethical issues, so let's have a look at those. Which are the most persuasive arguments for both sides and your own opinions? Now, everyone's opinion is going to differ on this. So it's really important to look at everything from all sides and consider other people's opinions. Opinions should always be probed, always should be changed, always should be considered. They don't necessarily be static. So have a real think about what you think is really important. Having an opinion is really, really important. Many embryonic stem cells come from aborted embryos or from spare embryos in a fertility clinic. So if somebody has had IVF, they will often produce several embryos but not use all of them. So they would have been disposed of, or they come from aborted embryos. Lots of people believe that the use of aborted embryos is unethical because they view the embryos as if they were fully developed humans. So this is kind of also a religious argument as to where life begins, is at conception. Stem cells are thought to hold huge potential for treating a wide range of diseases and disabilities, such as paralysis, diabetes. I mean, there's a huge amount of diseases that could benefit from this. They're pluripotent, which means they have the ability to become any type of cell, whereas adult stem cells, so coming from adult tissue, they lose their ability. They only have a small margin of a small spectrum of cells that they can become, whereas stem cells can become anything. Some types of stem cells are taken from other places without hurting anyone or anything, but they don't work as well as stem cells. Some stem cells come from umbilical cords and bone marrow, and they can be used in lots of different medical therapies. One argument is that if someone's having an abortion or a termination, isn't it better to get something useful out of the embryos? Stem cells are found within adult organs as well, so they could potentially be found that haven't taken on a role and become different types of organs. There's lots of different arguments there. Some of them are for, some of them against. Some of them are quite strong views. Which ones do you agree with? Now, the debate here is, should we be using stem cells? And at the end, there is an activity. There is an activity that you can use and you can print off, so go and have a look at those. But you need to prepare an argument either for or against the use of them. You will read the perspective of a doctor, a patient with diabetes, a Catholic priest, and a human rights activist. This should take you about 15 minutes to write a for or against. Now, because you are at home, if you have the time, do both. Write counter arguments for everything. It would be really, really good. Or if you know someone else, give them a Skype call or something like that and get them to do the opposing one. It'd be really, really good. Practice arguing for or against. That's a really good thing to do. And now what you need to do is to decide where on the line are you. So if this line was 1 to 10, where would you be? Maybe write down your opinion in your book, because that's quite a good thing. And it might mean that it's changed a little bit. We're going to look at some questions now to demonstrate our understanding of the topic. So describe 3 areas of medical research where the use of stem cells could provide valuable treatment, the main arguments for and against, and explain how scientists are hoping to overcome ethical objections to use embryonic stem cells in their research. Now, I have to say, these are very, very, very common looking questions that you would get on the exam. Pause it here. Do some writing. So 3 marks for the first one, 4 marks for the second one, 5 marks for the last one. Have a look. Add anything you missed. And we're going to mark it now. So make sure that you have got a pen handy. So spinal cord damage, diabetes, heart damage, eyesight, bones and cartilage repair, growing organs for transplant. So I mentioned the heart earlier. It says here any other valid suggestion. You need to be very, very specific. So for example, like it can help heal people is not, it's too vague. It's not specific enough. So spinal cord damage, paralysis, loads of different things. It could help people with Parkinson's or dementia, those kind of things. The prior question was, the next question was about main arguments for or against. So there's quite a few you can have there. So for, they can cure lots of currently untreatable diseases or injuries. They can provide new organs without death, less of rejection. Against, use of human embryos are problematic because, well, for lots of different reasons, but specifically problematic in terms of religion, but also physiologically, the risk of side effects. Remembering that stem cells technically could keep multiplying and become cancerous. Patients might need immunosuppressant drugs. It's probably quite expensive and it's under-tested at the moment. And it says any other valid evidence-based arguments. So you've got to give evidence for them. And then the final question was, how are they hoping to overcome ethical barriers? Well, using stem cells from umbilical cords and amniotic fluid, that's the fluid around a fetus in the uterus, instead of embryos, or using adult stem cells where possible, because they have a lot of uses, they just have a more narrow margin. Developing therapeutic cloning in which cells originate from the patient, so you don't have to worry about immunity problems if you've got transplants and things like that. So therapeutic cloning is where you remove the cell from the person that is being cloned, adult stem cell, and you clone that and re-inject that into a different part of their body so that they multiply. Say a lot. Sorry about that. And again, so here's some other words that are really good for language in these. Totipotent, pluripotent, and multipotent. Find out what these words mean. Also, this is a really interesting one. Ask your parents about this because most people know this guy. Find out who Christopher Reeve is, what happened to him, and how stem cells could be used to treat him and others with a condition like him. And then find out another way stem cells have been used. Good thing to look in the media. There's often quite a lot of things in the media. Have a little think. Can you do all of those things to get up to a step 7 and 8? Could you argue? Could you persuade? We've got a lot of time in at the moment. Start a conversation over dinner. It's quite a good thing. Now, the next few slides are for printing or for saving. Excuse me. Some other things about embryonic stem cells. You can use these to make your arguments for or against. Here's the page on therapeutic cloning. So taking cells from the donor, enucleate another donor egg, and then we can form an embryo and then put them back in.